gives me tremendous pleasure to have my friend and colleague Ali on the stage tonight. He is absolutely, he represents the best of the liberal arts traditions. He's a constant defender of that tradition, as you know, many of you know at UNE, and he is uncompromising when it comes about the rigor of political analysis and historical thought. So Ali Abdul-Latif Ahmida is a professor here in political science at the University of England. He was born in what then Libya and educated at Cairo University in Egypt and the University of Washington in Seattle. He is the founding chair of the Department of Political Science at the university, at this university, University of England. He is the author of numerous articles and is the author of The Making of Modern Libya, which came out in 2009, Forgotten Voices, Power and Agency in Colonial and Post-Colonial Libya in 2005, Post-Orientalism, Critical Reviews of North African Social and Cultural History, which came out in Arabic in 2009, The Libya We Do Not Know in Arabic, 2014, and he edited Beyond Colonialism and Nationalism in the Maghreb in 2000, and Bridges Across the Sahara in 2009. His most recent book, Genocide in Libya, is the subject of this lecture. I just want to mention something. I wrote something before I came up to this podium, and I think I don't want to surprise him a little bit. It's when I think it was his grandmother or someone, when he was a child, when Ali was a child in Libya, he remembers, I think his grandmother saying, "Maybe marad ghair dar agayla," which means I have no illness, I'm fine, except the house of Agayla, which represents a concentration camp, which meant a concentration camp during Italian colonialism. With this little intriguing quotation or mention, I will leave it now to Ali Ahmida to present his lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anwar, and thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today, in particularly this celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day. I think it's very fitting that this new scholarly project that I wrote and researched while being a UNE faculty and scholar that took 10 years of research and work and frustration and dead ends that took me to 3 continents in 3 languages, and also ended by, hopefully before I died from it, to be completed. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Some of you have read the book. Some of you probably have talked with me, or we engaged in an informal conversation about it. It's really, it's a culmination of a long scholarly journey for me. It's a part of a trilogy that I started as a green PhD student at the University of Washington in Seattle, which culminated in the publication of my first book, The Making of Modern Libya. And the original title of my PhD dissertation, which was made of, based on interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary research of anti-colonial resistance, was actually different. The title was For God, Homeland, and Clan. And that was the way the ordinary volunteer resistors of Italian colonialism saw their fight, even though they were defeated after 20 years of resistance. The second work, the second part of my trilogy, was published at UNE, actually. The book is called Forgotten Voices, which is a mediation, interdisciplinary mediation at the intersection of social history, political theory, and post-colonial studies. And that second manuscript also including the leading chapter of my research on the camps, which I started in the year 2000. The third book, I did other things, but the third book is the current one that I'm presenting to you today and telling you a little bit about it. The trilogy complement each other and allows, at least in the way I try to examine it and investigate it, to see how ordinary people, bottom up, of peasants, tribesmen, middle groups, try to negotiate colonialism, the central state, and modernity itself. My research has always been focused on the subaltern views and perspectives of the central state. I was brought up in modern Libya, where nationalism was big. And my research and my way of thinking about this problem of state-society relations has always been comparative, critical, and also reflective. In the last 20 years, I have been going through re-examining of my nationalist upbringing in Libya and in Egypt. And that also was informed by long research among the ordinary people, especially the thousands of Libyans who were put in concentration camps between 1929 and 1934. So it's not only discovering what is going on in the archives among the ordinary survivors of concentration camps, displacement and uprooting and exile, but also my own thinking has evolved with them. And I think this one, some of my colleagues think probably they say it might be my opus magnus work, because it took a long time and got really ready to be put together in a book that came out this year. Let me start by making some claims. And if you know me, I don't shy away from making claims. I want to start by making 3 claims. The first one, the Holocaust is not unique. Genocide happened before the Holocaust, and unfortunately, we wish, but genocide and mass killing continued after the Holocaust. Not only it's not unique, I would argue we need to revise our thinking about it. And thinking of it as unique is an obstacle and disservice to the survivors and the victims of the Nazi totalitarian state. I argue it's rooted in colonial model, in the sense that the 3 major genocides in Africa, which I studied very closely, the Congo genocide, which led to the killing under Belgian colonialism, 10 million people, the Herero people and the Nama people in Namibia, today called Namibia, used to be called Southwest Africa, under German colonialism, very, very similar to the Libyan case. The first genocide at the beginning of the 20th century. And the one that I examined and investigated for 15 years is the Libyan genocide. The second claim I make in this book is Italian fascism is neither benign nor moderate. It's not even a lesser evil, as the dominant canon of the study of Italian fascism and Italian colonialism try to perpetuate in our scholarship, in our media and entertainment. And I try to debunk that myth based on my research and investigation of the Libyan genocide. Third, I make the claim that settler colonialism very often is violent and genocidal. That will lead to confronting our dominant Western scholarship, historiography, political theory, and way of thinking about modernity and genocide in general. The challenge, therefore, becomes how to recognize the limitation and the flaws in the scholarship, and how maybe in the 21st century, as I make no hesitation and no diplomatic argument, that we need to revise and decolonize genocide studies. Now, these are my claims. Probably, and this is just an impression, probably most of you don't know about the concentration camps in colonial Libya. Probably also, if I'm correct, you're not alone. That case was robbed from modern scholarship completely. And let me give you a story about that. When I published my small monograph, Forgotten Voices, Power and Agency in Colonial and Post-Colonial Libya in 2005, a lot of our leading universities paid attention, and they invited me. Among them, Yale University Center for Comparative Genocide. This is one of our most prestigious and respected centers for the study of modern genocides. We drove to New Haven, me and my wife, and I decided, just for curiosity and just to know how my audience are thinking, what they know and what they don't know, I asked them, has any of you heard of the concentration camps in Italian fascist Libya? Two hands were raised. One read some of my articles, and the other person is an Ethiopian graduate student, because of the colonial experience in Ethiopia is very, very well known. So this gentleman knew about it. And that situation reoccurred when I was invited to Brown, UCLA, UC Berkeley, Washington University, Columbia, and also other places, including when I went to Temple University 2 years ago. And people were very open, graduate students and faculty. They were very receptive. They were eager to know, but they didn't know about it. And then I realized that has to be explained. Silence and the invisibility or the disappearance of the Libyan concentration camps. And if I am really serious scholar, then I have to explain not only what happened there, but also explain the struggle over memory and also forgetting. And that became very interesting, a quest. I started the research on this subject in the year 2000. But before I go on to explain to you and give you a narrative about some of my findings, let me give you a very, very short overview of what do I mean by the Libyan genocide. Libya was colonized between 1911 and 1943 by Italy. Egypt was taken, the rich colony, by Britain after Napoleon Bonaparte invaded and he was defeated. The Suez Canal became really important lure for the empire. The French took Algeria in 1830, and then after that, Tunisia, and then Professor Majid's home country, Morocco. In addition, of course, the Spanish colonialism also took section of Morocco, northern Morocco and some coastal parts of Morocco as well, and the Sahara, the Western Sahara. Libya was supposed to be a bucket of sand. It was a huge country. It was used to be called the Tarabulus al-Gharb, Tripoli of the West. It was the last province of the Ottoman Empire. The Italian colonial state looked at Libya as a foreshore, as a part of the Roman Empire, the way to justify that colonial conquest. But in 1922, without getting into details, you could ask me about it in question and answers later on, Italian fascists under Mussolini and the party, they had no interest in any indirect rule or any kind of compromises with the local resistance. The resistance was very stiff and incredibly organized because the central state was very weak and society had tradition of what I call self-governance based on Islamic organizations, local Maghrebi and North African organizations, and Sufi trading and educational movement, especially the brilliant movement, the Sanusiya. So when the Italian modern army invaded Libya and defeated the Ottoman garrisons, they faced a poor yet organized and very, very stubborn resistance that lasted for 20 years. The Italian fascist state, which by the way, there is also peculiarity to it. It was the only remaining fascist state that had colonies because Germany lost its colonies and the Nazi state emerged much later on. The genocide took place because of two forces, two factors. The first one, the Italian state wanted to bring settlers, poor Italian peasants, especially from the south, to settle them in a colony, Libya. Their dream is to settle between 500,000, sometimes in some records even 1 million, in the coastal fertile region of North Africa with the longest beaches, especially in eastern Libya, which is a fertile and green region of the country. At the same time, they faced the reality, this volunteer small armies of anti-colonial resistance that was stubborn and did not want to give up its resistance. The generals, especially the three generals of Mussolini, Badoglio, Di Bono, and Rodolfo Graziani, had the task of emptying eastern Libya and crushing the resistance. Now, why doing that? Because they wanted to empty the land and they wanted to subdue the resistance. They had followed the most vicious and draconian policies. And let me pause here and tell you about two conditions or factors in modern genocide studies that qualify a case not as a war casualties or the fog of war or all other things that modern armies try to to justify especially colonial armies or other endeavors. The father of modern genocide studies is a remarkable Polish legal scholar by the name of Raphael Lemkin. And my students at UNE know that name very well. I have a very innovative class called Empire and Genocide, based on my research on the genocide studies and this book particularly. He said you have to have two conditions. And he became so clear-headed in heading the UN conference on genocide in 1948. And he said you have intentionality and destroying the biological, the social, the cultural, and the economic basis of a community and replacing it. I found in my archival research letters of those generals say, you know, we are a modern army, we have to breathe, and if that means the end of the local indigenous population, be it. And they did follow that through. How did they do that? They transferred the civilian population of eastern Libya between 1929, 1930. We're talking about between 110,000, some Libyan historians think 120,000, I think at least 110,000, including children, women, and elderly people, and also their herds. They were self-sufficient local community made of peasants and tribesmen and scholars and journalists and teachers, and they could feed themselves, as they told me later on. They transferred them from the Green Mountains of northeastern Libya to the desert of Sirte by sea or via on foot. They didn't gas them, even though the first use of gas in Africa, northern Africa, was in Libya in 1928, before Ethiopia and before the Holocaust. Thousands died, especially the elderly and the children, and they put them in 16 concentration camps. I didn't study the 16 because that will be horrendous, and I don't have the capacity to do that. I studied only 5 camps, and these camps are the one I called later on the death camps. But by 1934, only 30,000 came alive. And you might ask, what happened in the camps? The Italian fascists did not gas the people who were put in collective concentration camps and prisons. They starved them. And when they get sick, they didn't treat them. So thousands of them died because of starvation, which they called shar, evil, and also diseases. Furthermore, the ecological and environmental impact of starving their own herds and animals, camels, sheep, and horses, devastated the local self-sufficient communities, and that also added to the starvation. So by 1934, when they defeated the resistance and 2/3 of the people who were interned perished, they released them. But they didn't release them to their homeland because they began to bring settlers, 20,000 in 1938 and more later on, as the plan was. Eastern Libya lost half of its population, 83,000 people. The whole colony of Libya, that will probably shock a lot of you, many of you, lost between 40% to 0.5% of its population. According to Ottoman census, Libya's population were between 1 million and 1.5 million in 1908, 1910. By 1943, Libya had 800,000 people. Didn't mean that people didn't have babies or make babies. That was the devastation. The neighboring colony of Tunisia had 1 million in 1908, 1910. By 1943, there were 2.5 million, to give you a comparative example of that. So this is really what I described as the Libyan genocide. Here is the challenge I faced. Why this case dropped out of modern scholarship? Who was behind it? How could I find the files that related to the camps? How can I get to the survivors? And I tried to follow the first option, like many other scholars. I'm trained as a political scientist, but also I studied African history and historical sociology and anthropology. And I decided to work on primary sources. But then I faced a number of obstacles. When I tried to find the files on the camps, starting from when I was just starting my PhD research in 1986, after 1 week, I was kicked out of the Italian archives, claiming that they came with the officials with a very lame excuse that I was of Libyan origins, and Libyan authorities, they don't really let us investigate and do research, in this case, the Italian scholars, so therefore we're gonna, unless they do that, we're not gonna let you continue. When I went to Libya, I asked them, is this true? They said, no, look at the Italian scholars, they're here. This is a lame excuse. Then I discovered that the officials in charge of the archives are ex-colonial officers, fascist officers. So they have a vested interest in controlling access to knowledge. And therefore, I reached to two elderly, remarkable historians, Angelo Del Bocca and Giorgio Rochat. They both studied the archives, and Rochat said in 1969 it was a genocide. But the elite, the public discourses, academic and state officials in Italy, they were in denial. There was silence, and they say not only this, that was a modernization, bringing a progress and discipline to the savages, semi-nomads, Bedouin of Libya. Then I remember I asked Professor Del Bocca, how could we overcome this silence in Italy? And how could I find the primary sources? If I don't have primary sources, that's going to be very difficult to investigate this case, because I have to have something. He said, son, you are still young. If I were you, don't waste your time here. I think that the state officials manipulated and got rid of all the sensitive files, especially the concentration camps. I said, what should I do? And I have the letters here in Maine. He said, son, if I were you, I'll go to Eastern Libya and see if I could talk to the survivors. So when I reached a dead end with the archives and realized also the archives are not, as we were told in graduate school, facts that you're going to discover. but they reflect the ideology and the arena of thinking of colonial states. I went to Eastern Libya. And here I have another confession. It wasn't as easy. I decided to find the survivors to my friends, classmates in Cairo, classmates and friends in the Boy Scouts, in sports, in marching bands competition. I was a trumpet player in Southern Libya marching band in middle school and high school. So I tried to use all the strings that I could. And yes, my grandmother is from Eastern Libya. And she died in exile. So I began to reach to them. And at the beginning, they didn't trust me. They were very suspicious of me. In anthropology, we call it reflexive anthropology, that people shouldn't just go there to study things, but also are they aware of the ethical question about doing research among people who went through trauma and suffering and genocide. And here I'm talking about kids. They are elderly now. They survived the concentration camps and the genocide because they were in the age of 5 to 15. And they're still alive. And when I started in 2000, some of them were still alive. And here, let me pause and tell you a little background about this, because that will help understand how I had a breakthrough. My modern education in Libya and in Cairo, in Egypt, and the United States prepared me for other things, did not prepare me how to study this case. Why? Because most of the people who were interned in the concentration camps before the Holocaust were illiterate, and their mode of communication in Arabic is very peculiar, not modern Arabic, and they communicate through poetry, colloquial Eastern Arabic and Central Libya and Eastern Libya, and also through oral traditions, orality. To assume that I could just convert it to modern Arabic or urban Arabic, that's not going to help. So my problem became compounded. I went to see them through two of my friends. I was vetted and interviewed before I could interview them. They asked me, who are you? What's your family? What's your clan? Who are your parents? Who are your grandparents? Why are you doing this? Is it for you? Are you going to be honest and tell the truth about what happened to us and not, ignore us like the state in Libya and also in Italy? What are you going to do with this scholarship? And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Because instead of us, we think that we are faculty and scholars and teachers going to these places and try to study people who are poor, illiterate, and who are really not wise nor really reflective. And it's really sometimes we do it with good intentions, but we come across as arrogant, as also careerist, and not trying to ask the question, what's the use of scholarship? What's the use of research? Are we just trying to look at our own accomplishment, or this is really speaking truth, respecting people against all the inequalities and dominations, and quite honestly, just taking their agency and humanity very seriously. So they vetted me, and then what helped me is not my modern education, but my mother and grandmother's subculture. Both my mother and grandmother were illiterate, very wise, very responsible, very, very astute women. And they spoke the language of similar background like Eastern Libya. So my mother, for example, my late mother, she died 15 years ago. She would, 20 years ago, I'm sorry. Now we are 21. You ask her a question, and she doesn't answer you quickly. She say either a poem or also says a proverb. And then we'll try to listen to her. I remember, for example, which is very relevant, the first time I heard of this poem that became really what kept alive the memory of the genocide despite the invisibility, the silence that happened after that. We sometimes say, oh, we are sick, Mom. And she would say, oh, I'm not sick except, I'm not ill except so-and-so, and say Dar al-Aqayla. And we kept saying, what's Dar al-Aqayla? Dar al-Aqayla for Libyan people, and I think I always say, is the Auschwitz of the Libyan genocide. The worst concentration camp among all the 16 camps. And then in 6th grade, I remember we read in Libyan, Southern Libya elementary school, a poem by a Libyan poet. His name is Ahmad Rafiq al-Mahdawi, called Little Ghait. And it's about a visit to concentration camp, talking about little orphan. And I remember me and my buddies in the class, we recited it and we made a play out of it. To my delight later on, this epic poem made of 15 pages became the counter-narrative of indigenous people talking back to fascism. And I spent 2 years trying to understand the meter, the orality, and the vocabulary of that poetry. Now, the other obstacles were the fact that for 10 years, every summer, my kids who are here in the audience, they will go with their mom to Seattle. I literally bribe them and encourage them to go there. So I'll go for 3 weeks, 4 weeks to Eastern Libya every year. And thank God I started in the year 2000, because had I waited in 2010, all of the survivors either died or became senile. And I didn't want to hurry this investigation. I saw myself as investigating a collective crime. There were many puzzles. There were many unexplained factors, even especially the voices of the survivors. So I took my time to figure out what's happened there. The Center of Libyan Studies gave me all of their collected oral history that was guided by the father of oral history in Africa, Professor the late Jan Van Sina of University of Wisconsin, who helped the government, who helped the center collect oral history. And then people, when they began to trust me, they gave me their cards, their drawings, their pictures, and I began to interview them. And after that, they began to find me. And to this day, I get email from their grandchildren and their children overseas in Europe, in Asia, telling me about asking me about this. Is the book going to be translated? Are you going to translate it into Arabic and give it to us as you promised our grandparents and grandmothers? And there are some really very moving stories. I remember this lady who was in her 80s when I interviewed her. She would sing to me one moment and then cry to me another moment. And then I collected as much as I can, and I got around finally 300 interviews. I felt comfortable that I had enough evidence to interpret it. And I spent 3-4 years trying to investigate and listen and try to compare the evidence, archival evidence in Italian, in English, and in Arabic. and the oral history and the interviews together. Eventually, a picture began to emerge. And I didn't know 70% of it. What was remarkable is a living culture in Libya and silence and production of knowledge that completely ignores it in Italy. People wanted me, when I presented this research earlier, to just focus on Libya. I was not interested in that. I wanted to study the Libyan case through comparative, cross-cultural, bottom-up point of view, from the survivor point of view, to understand what happened not only in Libya, but also in Italy. And there were some shocking discoveries. Aside from knowing the narrative of what happened in the camps and how people died and what happened after that. One time I was reading an Arabic sponsored Italian colonial magazine called Libya al-Musawwara, Illustrated Libya. And I saw a picture of one of the leaders of the Nazi generals. General Field Marshal Goring. And I saw him in the picture visiting Tripoli. And I said, wait a minute, is this just a coincidence or one visit, or there is more to it? So I said, let's follow it. I don't read German, unfortunately. So I asked a colleague, a German young historian, to verify for me, did the Nazis were interested in what the Italian did in Libya? And he said, is this just a coincidence, one case? He said, no, Professor. Actually, he sent me 4 articles that testify. The Nazi sent delegation after delegation to learn from the success and the efficiency of the fascists in Libya. And I said, oh my God, there is a link that nobody really took seriously. And I began to read what he wrote in English, and I discovered that there were delegations, exhibits, books that shows a very, very much interest. And what the Nazi state were interested in is how the Italian emptied Eastern Libya and how they're going to settle their own peasants there, comparable to their plan to settle 15 German-speaking people in Eastern Europe. And that really became it alerted me to the linkage that I was trying to bring earlier, which is the Congo. Hannah Arendt said that if you want to understand, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, understand what happened in the Holocaust, you got to pay attention to the preparatory stages that happened in the Congo and East Africa. The Polish-English novelist, Joseph Conrad, in The Heart of Darkness, which I also teach at UNE, he also alluded to this, and she referred to him, but also began to talk about how that connection was very crucial. Unfortunately, a lot of people talked about it and forget about this brilliant observation. In the Global Genocide by German state, where almost 60 or so thousand were exterminated who resisted German settlers and an army. Many people, generals, doctors, like there is this guy called Fisher. He was a specialist in racial anthropology, medical anthropology, and he tried to study that in Germany. One of his brightest students is Joseph Mengele, who became one of the major doctors of death in the Holocaust. And now I found a connection in the Libyan genocide with the Holocaust. It's remarkable because now we know that the African genocides, if you want to go beyond Eurocentric colonial reproduction of scholarship and the canons, and see the Holocaust not a unique and isolated case, irrational also, but really is connected to Africa, especially the three cases. And I think this is the new frontiers in scholarship when it comes to studying how to study post-genocide and also how to study the meaning of this, the larger meaning of this genocide in Libya. Now, two important observations, and then I'm going to go to the conclusion, so I leave time for question and answer because the material is so rich. And be patient with me. I spent 15 years researching this, so I have a lot of stories to share with you. That's my problem, I guess, in many ways. And my mother and my grandmother were great storytellers, as I always tell Anouar. So I have a problem stopping sometimes, and my kids will testify to that as well. Another factor contributed to the invisibility of the Libyan case, that the fathers of Libyan independence and the monarchy in 1951 made a choice. And the choice is, they said, well, we just gained independence. Italian fascism was defeated, and therefore let's have peace. We want to develop our country, and let's heal. It's an argument, but also that argument came in a full force with the military anti-colonial nationalist coup in 1969. Gaddafi came with a full force screaming, what about the camps? What about Agela? What happened in there? Nobody gives a damn about you. And began in a populist way to mobilize people to gain solidarity. Now, I will claim Gaddafi's use of anti-colonial history and the camps were masterful. Even when he visited Italy in 1998 with that vague ideology with apology with Berlusconi, he put Omar al-Mukhtar, the hero of anti-colonial resistance, as a way of saying, to people in Libya, I'm finally giving you a place under the sun, and there's an apology for it. The apology was vague, but it was also remarkable in the history of Africa itself. Now, I decided finally, after I did all the oral history and consulted and investigated all the archives in the United States, in England, in Italy, in Tunisia, in Egypt, and in Libya, it's time for me to go to the camps. And I went to the camps, and it was a very, very tough one. Now, this is what I'm talking about, the place of the camps. And these are the 16 concentration camps. And what I did here is they were in the desert, in the west of the country. The Sidi Hamad al-Magroon, Suluk, Suwan al-Tiriya, Lebrega, and the infamous Al-Agela. I was devastated. Many of them disappeared. Most of them became a victim of modern state development and real estate and so. And I found only the cemeteries, except one. Al-Agela still remained there, the most horrible of all the camps. I went there, and in one sense, I remember that very vividly, and I described it in my book. the most beautiful beaches, blue beaches, maybe the most virgin beaches in the Mediterranean remaining in Libya. And I saw, miles of terrible graves and cemeteries. It shook me. And I said, I came face to face with the genocide and death. Here, the beauty of the beaches and the remaining of the genocide. Now, I brought after that the whole argument, the history of the present about in America. What about our own society? I mean, the Italians, still elite and public officials and monuments still cling to the idea, Italiani brava gente, means Italian are good people. As if the Germans are nasty by temperament, and the Italians cannot commit that. And unfortunately, that even the three major theorists of modern genocide and modernism, Hannah Arendt, Michel Foucault, and Giorgio Agamben, I think these are the major influential theorists of genocide in our Western traditions. Hannah Arendt, I have a soft spot for her because she was brilliant earlier, but she had blind spots, 2 of them. She thought, there was no Jewish question in Italy. Italy was just an ordinary dictatorship. But she didn't know about Libya. Had she included Libya or included the Congo as she did earlier, she said that the Holocaust is not really unique. But in the case of Italy, she thought that, Jews were members of the fascist party up until 1938, and there was no question. Her second blind spot, which I really call her on that, and her followers, she was silent about Native American genocide. We're having, Indigenous People Day today, and we as a society in America, we made some steps, but we have a long way to go. And I think when we recognize that, we're going to be really recovering and healing, in my opinion, as we are trying to do with the question of slavery, racism, sexism, and other aspects that brings people together in many ways. Foucault said that the prison as an institution is the symbol of modernism or modernity. But he's silent. He wrote about Tunisia a little bit, about Japan, and about Iran, but he's silent about the whole empire and colonial question. Agamben, who is really the rising star, the new Foucault in our Western genocide studies, is even more problematic, in my opinion. He talks about the concentration camp as symbol of postmodern era. Yet he ignored completely what happened under fascism, Italian fascism in Libya. Completely silent about it, and I really put him to task. I slammed him very, very hard on that. That's not gonna endear me in the eyes of many, many people who are talking about brava gente and the benign and moderate or lesser evil fascism. In America, I looked at 3 arenas: State Department, National Geographic magazine, New York Times, our Hollywood films, and some of the social sciences in it. And unfortunately, our public opinion is completely in the dark about it, because to this day, we have movies that deal with Mussolini, Mediterranean, all of these movies that are romantic. Italy is a place of culture and passion and art and opera, and so how could that happen? It can't be. And I tell them, Italy is all of these things, wonderful things. And I love Italy too, and its other traditions, but also there is the confrontation with the genocide that took place in Libya. I think my book investigated a messy topic. And I was lucky that my university allowed me to do this, supported me, encouraged me, and provided me with small grants to continue this. As an American scholar, Libyan American scholar, I'm very, very, very grateful and very, very proud of what I did. It took forever to do that. But I hope that will open new gates, theoretically, in terms of historiography, in terms of the political theory of genocide, that allows us to go beyond Eurocentric, colonial, and also canons, and open new frontiers, as we have been in this society. I mean, look at the Tulsa massacre. It took us 80 years to recognize that. And I'm pain in the neck for the established advocate of Italian benign fascism and the whole idea. And I hope that this book will open a new frontiers, a new agenda that will allow us to learn and break the invisibility and break the silence, and allow us to heal, allow us to recognize. And I promised my kids who are here that the next book will be about something very light, maybe cinema or music or something. And I hope, I'm having trouble with that promise, but I'm going to try to link since they are here. So let me just show you another picture. This is a picture, an aerial picture of one of the camps. This is the Agela, the horrible Auschwitz-like concentration camp. And this is where I have more hair there, apparently. That's good to remember. I was going from one place to another, and this is one of the survivors who were talking to me in a Rajma, which outside Benghazi at that time. I think I'm going to stop here. I'm sorry it took me more than I planned to share with you, and I'll open the floor for questions and reflections and inquiries.